Hey guys, in this video I'll be reviewing the TurboX Mini compressor from Gaahleri to see if it's worth considering for a mini painter who uses an airbrush. This is the most compact airbrush compressor I've ever seen, but is it any good? Let's find out. The TurboX is not the first mini compressor that I have tested from Gaahleri. Late last year I received the Selenair mini compressor kit from them. Back then I was amazed at how a small and cheap machine like the Selenair can rival the performance of my big boy compressor, and I recommended it as the perfect entry point to airbrushing for mini painters. And since then I have used the Selenair a lot, and by a lot I mean that I have been using it as my daily driver compressor for all my painting projects involving an airbrush, and I haven't even turned on my big old compressor since that review. Yes, the Selenair is that good, so my long-term review of it would be even more positive than the one I gave it back then. So this time around I'm much less skeptical about these tiny Gaahleri compressors. Now my question is not whether it can do the job, but whether it's worth getting this one over the Selenair, considering that the TurboX Mini is even smaller and cheaper. And full disclosure, Gaahleri sent this compressor to me for free, but without any strings attached. I can say whatever I want about it, so you will get my honest opinion based on the experience I had with it during the project I will show you later in the video. If you want to buy the TurboX Mini or any other Gaahleri product, they also provided me with a personal link and a discount code that you can find in the video description. If you purchase something through that link, I get a little kickback from that without any additional cost to you, so that is a great way to support the channel. Oh, and I was told that the discount code stacks with any ongoing sales, like the 10% early bird discount on the TurboX Mini, so by taking advantage of both, you can get the compressor for 20% off right now. Alright, let's unbox the TurboX Mini, let's see how it looks, take a peek at the features, and then I'll check what it can really do by painting an actual model with it. As far as I understand, there are two versions of this kit. You can either get only the compressor without an airbrush on their website, or this bundle which comes with the GAAHLERI airbrush included from other retailers like Amazon. The GAAHLERI is a solid workhorse airbrush. I tried it in the previous review, but personally I like the Seeker from Gaahleri much more, so if you have the chance and the means, I suggest going for the vanilla version of the TurboX Mini and combining it with the Seeker. But the GAAHLERI is not a bad option. Other than the airbrush, the compressor comes with everything you need: an instruction manual, wall adapter fit for your region, and a hose for the airbrush. But of course, what we care about most is the TurboX Mini itself, and this thing is positively tiny. When I reviewed the Selenair, I was amazed by the size, and I even joked that you could even carry it in your pocket, although it's literally a stretch. But this one is not even a stretch. It's less than 2/3 of the size of the Selenair, which is bonkers. I'll put the exact dimensions on the screen for you. It looks much more modern than the Selenair too. The older and bigger brother had full manual controls with a set of buttons controlling everything and only a couple of LEDs giving you feedback about the settings you are using. On the TurboX, things are quite different. There are no LEDs or buttons to be seen. Instead, you have a large display on the top that can show you the pressure you are operating at and also the temperature of the unit in real time. Under that, you have a big dial that you can rotate but also push like a button to access various functions. More about that in a second. The Mini also comes with a little hole on the front, which conveniently fits a little plastic piece that acts as a stand for the airbrush, which doesn't seem that essential, but it becomes essential as soon as you are holding an airbrush full of paint and no place to put it without spilling it when you need to grab something else. At the bottom you have 4 little rubber feet which absorb vibrations while the unit is operating, and they also act as suction cups anchoring the TurboX on flat surfaces so it can't move away from the spot you placed it while it's running. 2 sides are empty, but on the right you have the single air outlet where the airbrush hose attaches to. The Selenair actually had 2 of these, but to be honest I never used a second airbrush while painting minis, so 1 is the perfect amount. Finally, on the top side there is the socket for the power adapter and a little toggle which allows you to switch to compatibility mode. I'll put the explanation of what this does on the screen. I didn't really fiddle with it and I left it on the normal setting while I was using the compressor. At this point I also have to mention that the build quality of this thing is better than the Selenair. It's clearly made out of different kinds of plastic, but they feel quite high quality and solid. The big dial is especially nice. Turning and clicking it is a very tactile feeling. There are certain buttons that are simply a joy to fiddle with, and this is one of those. It's probably not the most important thing on a compressor, but it's still nice. Overall, the Mini seems like a step up from the Selenair in terms of looks and feel, and the user interface is much more modern. So let's turn it on and see what we can do with that nice big dial. You turn on the compressor by pressing the dial down for a few seconds. When you do, the screen lights up and the compressor immediately builds up the pressure in the hose. You can change the pressure very precisely by turning the dial left or right, or you can go in preset increments by clicking, so basically a single short press. You can also double click it to bring up the real-time temperature of the compressor. According to the manual, the TurboX Mini also gives you a warning if the temp reaches 85 degrees Celsius and automatically shuts down if it goes above 90. This sounds useful considering that this thing is tiny and I had my doubts about how well it can deal with heat, but I will come back to that in a second when I try it out in practice. One more thing to consider is the noise the compressor makes, and on paper the Selenair is actually less noisy with 35 decibels according to the official specs, while the TurboX Mini is listed as less than 48 decibels. In practice, the TurboX Mini is significantly quieter in my experience. It produces a softer, more buzzing noise compared to the slightly higher pitched and more mechanical sound of its bigger brother. The Mini sounds almost like a big phone set to vibrate lying flat on a table. If we consider my big compressor as a 10 when it comes to noise, then the Selenair is something like a 4 or a 5 and the TurboX Mini is a 3. You can easily have a conversation or listen to an audiobook while using this. So to summarize, just from the looks and features standpoint, the TurboX has the Selenair beat. This looks more modern, it has more functions, better features, it's significantly smaller and even a little quieter than its older brother. But let's see if it can perform as well under pressure. A quick reminder, when I reviewed the Selenair, I was worried about the lack of a tank on the compressor. I was afraid that it would lead to uneven air pressure, but ultimately I could barely feel the difference, and in the long term, I didn't really miss the tank at all. The TurboX also comes without a tank. It could hardly fit one in this tiny form factor, so we will see if this will be to its detriment. I believe the best way to test a compressor is to simply use it in an actual project, so I dusted off an old Gaahleri tank from my storage. I literally had to dust it off because I built and base coated this model years ago and it has been sitting untouched since. I decided to start from scratch and erase any trace of the old base coat with a new black primer layer. Priming is one of the most basic things you can do with an airbrush, so it's a good start. I loaded one of my usual airbrush primers, slightly diluted, and started blasting. A couple of things stood out to me instantly. The pressure started at the level I set it on the display, but as soon as I pressed down the trigger, I immediately felt a loss of power. And the display shows this as well, but the actual pressure drop is not as drastic as the one shown on the display. Now, a drop like this is more or less normal, especially on compressors without a tank. It's a little more noticeable on the Selenair than on my old compressor, but it's much more obvious here. It didn't really impact the result in any way. I was able to do the priming as usual without any problems, but this was something I had to get used to. The other thing is that for priming I usually set a little higher PSI than for something like highlighting, but here I had to overcompensate to get the pressure I'm used to. So if I usually set the PSI to 23, then I had to go for something like 28 or even higher to have the same performance out of the Mini. Overall, the performance was enough for what I needed, but here I had to operate closer to the max settings, while on the Selenair I would be using the middle setting or maybe the one above that with plenty of horsepower left. For the next step, I used the white ink to apply a zenithal highlight over the whole tank, and once again, at the usual PSI I would use for something like this, so around 21 or so, I felt that I didn't have enough oomph and the result was a little more speckling than I would want. So I had to increase the pressure to around 25-28 PSI on the display to get the result I wanted. The next step was to base coat all the colors on the Wave Serpent, going from a dark purple in the back to a green in the middle all the way to a light turquoise on the front. At this point I started to get a feel for what the compressor was doing. I preset the pressure to higher than what I'm used to, anticipating that it would be underpowered otherwise, and everything went pretty much flawlessly. I was shooting slightly thinned down Greenstock World paints. These are quite liquid out of the bottle, so I added only 20-30% thinner and I had zero issues applying them. Once all the colors were done, it was time to add some Eldar motifs using some masking tape. I tend to use slightly thicker paint and slightly more pressure for this because if you don't apply the tape perfectly, which can happen over an uneven surface like this, then the slightly liquid paint can pool and seep under the edges, ruining the design. And cleaning that up is not fun, so a little thicker paint can prevent that in my experience, which is also a good test of how far I can push the compressor. So this time around I sprayed almost undiluted orange and yellow paint over the mask, and for this I had to set the compressor to almost its max setting to get the result I wanted. It worked without any issues, but with the Selenair I could have done the same with a lot more potential power to spare. The final test I wanted to try was to spray all the Eldar jewels on the model, and there are a lot of those ranging from quite big to really tiny. Doing them by hand would be very time consuming, but doing them with an airbrush needs a bit more skill than a simple base coating or highlighting a big surface. Let's face it, I was spraying white ink on an already mostly painted model, which can cause a catastrophe if the airbrush misbehaves. A mistake can happen because of user error, or because the airbrush is not precise enough, or because uneven airflow from the compressor. I have reasonable confidence in my own skill, and I knew that the Seeker was definitely good enough for something like this since I have used it for trickier things in the past, but I wasn't sure how the TurboX Mini would behave. So first I sprayed a highlight of white over the red base coat of the gems, and then I covered the white with fluorescent orange ink. And as you can see, I managed to paint even the smallest gems without messing up the paint job around it, or accidentally covering the red fully. By this point I got used to the way the air was delivered by the TurboX, and I had no issues getting the result I wanted. At this point I also need to circle back to the question of temperature. When I saw the size of this thing, I was a bit worried that it would overheat quite fast. But during all my testing, I never managed to push the temp above 45 degrees Celsius, which is only halfway to the 90 Celsius where the Mini would shut down automatically. I was using it at what I would consider normal room temperature, so about 22-23 Celsius. I suppose if you use it in a much hotter environment and for hours, then temperature could be more of a problem, but it was a non-issue for me. Alright, so after having used it for an entire project, what do I think of the TurboX Mini, and is it replacing the Selenair as my favorite compressor? Well, it's prettier, smaller and quieter than the Selenair, but the performance is also proportionate to the size. It is absolutely enough for anything an average painter would throw at it, but I like having the extra power the Selenair has, and I can live with it being a little less sophisticated when it comes to the controls and the user interface. That being said, if you're a painter who moves his setup a lot but you still want to bring your airbrush with you, or if space is a very limited resource for you in your hobby space and the reason you don't have an airbrush is because you don't have enough room for it, or maybe you care about the noise level a lot. Well, in that case the TurboX is perfect for you. It can do anything you need quite proficiently, and it will do it quietly without taking up much space, and it will even look good while doing it. It's a great little machine, and while the Selenair is good enough even for enthusiasts, this one is really meant for the average hobbyist or beginners. And there you have it, this is my conclusion about the TurboX Mini. Thanks for listening to my rambling this long, I really appreciate it, and thanks to Gaahleri for sending me the compressor for free. Don't forget to use the discount code and affiliate link in the description if you are shopping for any Gaahleri products. And if you like the video, do me a solid and subscribe, like and comment, it really helps with the algorithm showing it to other people. And check out my Patreon for some awesome painting guides and long-form painting videos. And as usual, before I sign off, I wanted to thank my Patreon members for all their support. Without them, this channel wouldn't exist, and that is especially true for the ones in the Captain level. Thank you guys, see you in the next one.